Welcome to the Midlife Career Rebel, the podcast created for high-achieving professional women to gain the clarity, confidence, and courage they need to go after and get the life and career they want. I'm your host, Dr. Carol Parker Walsh, lawyer, social scientist, brand strategist, executive coach, entrepreneur, and midlife career rebel. Each week, you'll learn strategies to manage your mind, navigate the challenges of midlife, and take control of your career so you can thrive doing the work you love. So if you're ready to tear up that rule book and create your own, you're in the right place, and I can't wait to show you how. Hey, Rebels, welcome to another episode of the podcast. We have another exciting guest today. Her name is Janine Esbrand. She, like me, is a fellow attorney turned consultant and coach. She's a highly acclaimed career strategist, executive coach, and speaker, and she's on a mission to help professionals, especially women, to approach their career development and advancement with intention and confidence. Her TEDx talk and keynote presentations have inspired thousands to take control of their careers and leverage their strengths to make true impact in the world. And I'm so happy that she's here today because that's exactly what we're going to talk about, which is how you can take the reins and really get in the driver's seat of your career so that you can become a CEO of your career. And with that, Janine, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for that intro. I am super excited to have this conversation and share with the audience.
Yes, it's so exciting. And, I mentioned earlier that we were both practice law, and I would just love to hear. I want to ask you, your career development, and maybe this could be a part of it, like how you got to where you are now. But how did you go from law to here? I'd love to hear that story because, and if people are still questioning you, like, why aren't you practicing law anymore? Because I get it's been 20 years for me, but I still get that question every now and again.
Right? Yes. People like it's like, oh, that's an interesting transition. Why would you do that? So
Right.
for me, it was I started out when I was really young, I wanted to be a lawyer. I decided I wanted to be a lawyer off the back of a conversation with my mum. In her frustration, she was like, "You should be a lawyer because you have an answer for everything." Because I was quite, opinionated as a child. And she sowed the seed then. And as I was growing up, I would watch programs like Ally McBeal and Law and Order, and I would think, "Oh, that looks like a glamorous career. I'd love to do that." And that was really what sold it for me. That was the thing that made me follow the path and do the studies and do all the things. And in the UK, in order for you to qualify after you go to law school, you have to do 2 years in a law firm working on a placement called a training contract. So once I got onto my training contract and I was working in it, I started to think, oh, this isn't quite what I thought it was going to be based on Ally McBeal and Law and Order. But I was still doing my work, but I had the opportunity to go on a mission trip. So I went with a group of lawyers. We went to East Africa, and we were doing some work on the ground. So we were going into prisons and we were educating prisoners about their legal rights because many of them had been arrested and put in prison because they weren't able to pay a bribe because there was a lot of corruption. And we were able to like support them with knowing what they needed to do and how to represent themselves. And then we went into villages and we were educating people about child protection rights. And it was just so impactful. We were only there for a short
Wow.
time, but so much ground. And I came away changed. Like I was like, okay, we've just done some really impactful work. I was back in my office working at that time I was in the litigation department and we were chasing unpaid gas bills. We were working for a gas company. We were advising a gas company, and I was literally just like emailing people, asking them why they hadn't paid. And I was just thinking, what am I doing? Like 2 weeks ago, I was in a dusty prison in Kenya, fighting for like freedom for people, and now I'm chasing like people to pay bills. It just felt very like the contrast was crazy to me. And so at that point, I was thinking, okay, so I want to do something that's going to be impacting people on a personal level. But I've
Mm.
also worked very hard to get to this point in my career, and I don't want to walk away from it completely. So I started looking at, well, what could I do? And I came across various different things like human rights law and other things that I just felt like, no, I don't think that's quite it. And I remember coming across an advert for the Coaching Academy, and it said, come for a 2-day taster. And I was like, what's coaching? Started looking into it, went for this 2 day. And literally, Carol, when I got in the room and they were sharing about what coaching was, I was like, oh my goodness, I've always been a coach. I just didn't know it. Like, I've always been the type of person to look at, where can we go from here? Like, what, I know this has happened in the past, but what are we going to do? What's our strategy? How are we moving forward? And always looking at the positives and helping people to see the positive sides of themselves and uncover their strengths. Like, I just would naturally be that friend that people would always come
Mm.
to. And so when I realized there was a whole industry, I was like, oh my goodness. And I went down a rabbit hole and I got my certification alongside my legal career. And I was happy. I was happy doing both. I had a portfolio career, so I was working as a lawyer. I was a corporate lawyer at the time, and then I was starting to coach people on the side, and it worked really well as a portfolio career until it didn't. Lockdown
Mm.
happened, the pandemic happened, and I have two young children. And so I remember one particular day where I was working as in-house counsel for a startup and I was on the call and they were like, Janine, we need to turn this contract around by like tomorrow. Can we do that? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Jump off that call and then jump on a coaching call with a client. Meanwhile, my kids are in the background being like, Mummy, can I have a snack? And I was like, okay, this is too much. Like, I can't do all the things. And so I had to have an honest conversation with myself and say, look, what are you going to do? Are you going to go back to lawyering full time? Or are you going to give this business a shot? Like, just go all in with coaching, consulting, speaking, and all of that. And I didn't like the idea of lawyering and leaving the business alone because I just loved
Mm.
coaching. And so I
Mhm.
decided to go all in 2021. And that's what I've been doing since then.
That is so fabulous. I love that story. It's always interesting to me the journey that people take in and out of law. I think we've talked before, because I had the privilege of being a guest on your podcast that, I think when I started practicing like in the late 80s, early 90s, there wasn't this thing called like coaching, or it wasn't really a thing,
Mm,
coaching and organizational development and leadership development. Like it was basically just like kind of skills you would take, or if there was coaching, it would be to correct behavior, right? It would be to
mm,
improve something that was wrong,
right.
in order to either probably, prove that they tried before they fired you, or really to try to rehabilitate you. So it really wasn't a thing. And I think back, if that was a thing back then, I think I probably would have went into coaching too, because I had the same kind of experience when I started moving. And I realized I was doing it too. But once I kind of got into the field and start doing it more, I'm like, where has
Mm,
this been all my
been
life? So I
right.
love I love that you found the same thing. Yeah. And to really make an impact, which is great. Before I move on, I just want you to do something really quick. You've said the term portfolio career. And I
Yes.
just, for the listeners who I think
Hmm.
I may have described it before in a previous podcast, but I would love for you just to
Yeah.
explain what is a portfolio career.
Yeah, so a portfolio career is essentially where you don't just do one thing and you have multiple things that you're doing that make up your time at work. And I think now more and more people are realizing that that's an option. You may have like different passions or different things that you want to do, and you don't necessarily have to only do one. So the thing that I enjoyed about lawyering and coaching is that both of them required different skill sets and I got to use different parts of my brain and I got to use different, things that I was good at in both spaces. And so sometimes we can be trying to find everything that we want in our career from one role. And for some people that doesn't work. Sometimes it's actually I'm going to do my full-time job here. There's something I'm passionate about that might not pay the bills, but I could do it on the side, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes that's required for people to find the fulfillment that they want rather than trying to like fit everything into the one role, which may not exist.
Yeah. I love that you said that, because I often tell people like this magical unicorn of the perfect job. Like for some people, they do find it, and that's great. They found something that they love, they do it to the retire. But for a lot of people, they are multi passionate and they do have multiple talents and skills, and they love to be able to utilize their gifts over here in one way and then utilize
Hmm.
some others in a completely different way. And so I love this idea of the of a portfolio career, because it gives you the opportunity to really live fully into all of your gifts, as opposed to thinking you
Yes.
have to find just one thing. And I keep telling people it's a myth and to me in a lot of ways, if there's this perfect job out there, right? There's
Mhm.
always opportunities to do so many different things depending on where you are in your life, what
Yeah.
interests you, what makes the most sense. Like you said, when the kids were running around and life changed for you, you thought differently about what you wanted to really prioritize your time with. And I think having a portfolio career allows you to be able to do that in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize that the person that you are in your early 20s is not the same person that you are in your 30s or your 40s or your 50s, right? And so
Yes.
rather than feeling like, I made a decision in my 20s and I need to stick to what I decided to do, it's like, well, you're actually a different person to who you were back then.
Yes.
Like a lot of things have happened. Um, Life probably has shifted for you in various different ways. And so it's okay to reinvent yourself and say, that was what I did for a season and now I want to do something different. Like we can do that.
Yes. Yes. You have permission.
Yes, you have
Those of
permission.
you are listening. So, so we're talking about, really kind of taking the reins. And I think one of the ways to take the reins is, as you even described with a portfolio career, as an option. But what do you think in terms of cultivating this idea of being a CEO of your career?
Mm,
Like for you, what does that mean? And how can women kind of really cultivate the skills, the mindset to be able to step into that role?
yeah. Yeah, so the reason why I like talking about this is that I think as I've grown as a business owner and developed some of the skill sets that are required for you to run a business, I've realized more and more the parallels between what you need to be able to do to run a business and what you need to do to run a successful career. And if you think about a CEO of a company, there's really two things that a CEO of a company has to focus on. The first is the vision. Like, why do we even exist as a company? Where are we trying to go? What are we trying to achieve? Who do we want to be in the market? And the second is the strategy. Like now we've got the vision, how are we going to make that a reality? And I think for a lot of people who are going through their careers, they don't spend a lot of time on the vision piece and they're too much in the doing piece before they've established what am I even trying to create here? And so
Mm-hmm.
to be the CEO of your career really means I'm going to take ownership of where I want to end up and be intentional about the action steps that I actually take to get there. So it means you're going to take the time to actually say, okay, in this season, where do I want to be? Let's take away the will I be able to make that happen? Is that even possible though? I don't think I could do that here. Like forget that. Forget the
Mm-hmm.
how. Let's talk about the what first. Like what is it that I want to do? What is it that I want to create? And then once you've established that, then you can move on to okay, if I want that to be a reality within this particular time frame, what are the best steps that I could take to get there and those steps might include having to get support, that might include having to enlist some help from different people, but at least you know where you're heading. And once you
Mm-hmm.
know where you're heading, then you can figure out your strategy. And I think that's a shift in mindset for a lot of women in particular, because often we wait for the external factors and the external permission to tell us what's possible for us. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, I've seen another woman do that. And so I think it's possible for me. But if I haven't seen anyone do it, then I don't think I can. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, do we know that to be true though? And so I think it helps to empower people to say, just because something hasn't been done before doesn't mean I can't be the first person to do it. So the same
Mm-hmm.
way, if you think about, the biggest CEOs or the most well-known CEOs that we know, like if we think of Amazon and we think of Apple, we think of the ones that you remember and we know about are the ones who did something different to literally like change the way we do life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
you as an individual, you have the opportunity to do amazing things with your career if you think outside of the box.
Mm-hmm.
And so
I
that's how
love
I look at
that.
it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think, what when I started doing this work, what I thought was fascinating, and even it was my own experience when I started even making the transition, thinking about what I wanted to pivot into when I decided to start my business, was just really asking myself, what do I want to do? What matters to me? And where do I see myself in the next few years? And so I asked myself those questions. And I remember when I first started doing the work, I would ask other women the same question. And it was just kind of surprising to me, although it shouldn't have been, because I didn't ask myself those questions until very
Mm,
much later in my life, that they never asked themselves what they wanted. Everything was guided by what a boss said, what a mentor said, what a
Hmm.
well-meaning friend had said, or what they believe to be the typical projection of their career, the trajectory that, well, if I'm
Yes.
here, then I obviously need to go here, and then I obviously need
Right.
to go there. Do I want to do that? Does that make sense? I don't know, but it's where it's what I should do because it's what's been designed for me without me even really thinking about it. Right. And so I
Hmm.
think that is so powerful when you talked about having a vision, having that clarity, knowing what you want and where do you want to go. Why do you think it's so hard for women to really ask and answer that question for themselves?
Mm. I think particularly when you're thinking about, lawyers or um, professionals who are in spaces or in roles that require you to go through a lot of education and take a certain step after step after step, as you described. It's difficult because the path is laid out. It's like, I want to be a lawyer. And so you then become a lawyer, and then you're working towards being an associate, and then you're working towards being a partner. And it's just laid out. And so if you start on that path, there's so much investment that's gone into you getting there, right?
Mm-hmm,
And so
mm-hmm.
there's that sunk cost fallacy, right? That where it's like, oh, I've done all of this, and so I have to keep going. So like, why would I step off the treadmill? And
Yeah.
so I think it's the fact that everything is so laid out, and there's also the element of like the pace at which we're moving through life. Like,
Mm.
there's so much going on all of the time. You do one thing, and as soon as you finish that one thing, you're on to the next thing. If you're a high achiever, you don't take time to like reflect on what you've done and really take it all in. It's like, okay, next. Like, what am I doing next? What's the next milestone? And so if you're always thinking about what's next, and you then also have the path already laid out, it's like, have you taken the time to actually reflect on, how do I feel about hitting this milestone? Do I feel the way I thought I was going to feel? Is this really what I still want? And I think people struggle to take that time out if they don't have that external person like a coach or a mentor asking them the questions, because
Mm-hmm.
they've been on this path and they do things. Ultimately, you think how you think, unless there's a pattern interrupt. So if you've been
Mm-hmm.
thinking this way and you've just been going this way, unless there's someone else or an external factor that's going to get you to question, you're unlikely to do that. And so that's
Mm.
why, coaching's so powerful.
Yeah, totally. Man, that is such a good point. You're right, because if these external markers and external validation for hitting those
Yes,
markers can
yes.
be so overwhelmingly powerful that you're right. You either don't look for the pattern interrupt or you struggle or resist any kind of pattern interrupt because you're like, but wait a minute, isn't this what I'm supposed to do? I think those
Hmm.
societal pressure on women to particularly high achieving women who are like always going after that brass ring, to stop and say, well, you don't have to go after the brass ring, or it doesn't matter what other people think of you, or
Yeah.
how other people are defining your career, or just because they're praising you for the fact that you reached director or VP. If you don't want to be there, like, that's really the thing that matters. And I think it's hard to reconcile this external
Yeah.
acceptance and validation with maybe some intrinsic motivation to kind of disrupt that pattern and choose your path as opposed to the societally acceptable path.
Yeah. And there's so many, when you talk about, worrying about what other people think, there's so many assumptions that people make. So it's like, okay, if I'm on this path, even if I wanted to consider moving off this path, I couldn't, because I wouldn't be able to get paid the same amount, and I'm the main primary breadwinner in my family, or I'm the person who's expected to do this, this, and this. And so it's almost like I'm trapped here because there isn't anything else I can do. And what I find interesting with clients that I work with is when I ask them the question, how do you know that? They haven't done research, they haven't had conversations, they haven't actually explored any alternatives, but they seem to know as fact that they can't get any other role that's going to pay them on par with what they're getting paid now. And so I think you have to watch that. It's like, what assumptions am I making about what's possible? And actually, what if I took the steps to do some research? What if I took the steps to find out like, and gather the data so I can actually make an informed decision about whether or not I can or can't move versus an assumption that's going to keep you where you are and it may not be necessary.
Absolutely. I always tell my clients it's that like little crazy, tricky little brain of theirs that's that's feeding them this information because whenever we try to take just even the slightest step out of our comfort zone, fear kicks in, and our brain is going to do whatever it can to protect us from feeling
Mhm.
emotionally uncomfortable or traumatized. So I think some of just like what you said, the thought of I'm going to go bankrupt, or I'll never find another job, or I'm going to lose my respect, or, and of course it goes to the extreme. Just the thought of making a change or a pivot, it leads straight to bankruptcy and death. And so there's never, it's never, and like it is just our brain trying to say, okay, I don't know what's going on, but I know you feel a lot of anxiety, and so in order for me to protect you, let me try to squash that anxiety by telling you
Mm,
all these lies and all this
right.
nonsense to kind of keep your foot right back into that comfort zone. And you're right, and I
Yeah.
think what you said is the best way to challenge that, which is to ask yourself, is it true?
Mhm.
Where's the data? Like, show
Mhm.
me evidence that supports all of these fears being reality and not just assumptions or things that are happening in your mind. So I think that is so
Yeah.
powerful. That's so excellent.
Yeah, absolutely. And you gotta look for possibility models. Like, you
Yeah.
need to see, do I have evidence of other people being able to do this in the past? I remember working with a client who she'd been in her company for like 11 years. She worked in sales and she was in the oil and gas industry, and it was really misaligned with her values. She didn't want to work in the oil and gas industry to the point where she was embarrassed about what she did and she wouldn't share like where she worked with
Mm-hmm.
people.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to her, like, you can transition, like you could totally transition. She's like, yeah, but I'm the primary breadwinner in my family and I can't take a pay cut. I was like, I know, but you can transition. And she ended up moving into like the decarbonization space. She got a promotion, she got a salary increase, she negotiated flexibility, and I was like, what would you tell yourself from like a few months ago? Because you thought this wasn't possible, and all of the things that you said would be ideal that seemed impossible, you've literally ticked those off your list. And so,
Yes.
looking for, if you can't have it for yourself, like looking at other people who have made the type of transition that you're considering and having conversations to see, like, okay, this is actually possible. Another human being has done it. And if they could do it, I could do it, is super, super powerful and helpful when you're in that, like, I'm doubting what's possible phase.
I love that. And I love the term possibility models. I think that is such a great term. One of the things that this reminds me of, and I would love to get your thoughts around this, is that I have my clients do what I call like a pilot study. Like, because before
Mhm.
when I did my dissertation, we had to run a pilot, right? To just see if it was right, to check the research and are we on the right track. So that brings up, how important is it for when you're in this process, right? When you're learning to take the reins, stepping into the CEO, taking control of your career, to not do it in isolation, right? To
Mm,
really get out there and have conversations, to look for those possibility models, to talk to other people. Like, how important is that process in
yeah.
the journey of really stepping into being CEO of your career?
Yeah, that part of the process is vital. It's gonna save you time. It's going to save you time, possibly resources, for you to have conversations with people. So I call, like, people can call them, the general term is informational interviews. I call them
Mm-hmm.
golden nugget conversations. And the reason I call them
Mm.
golden nugget conversations is that you can literally have a 20-minute conversation with someone, and that conversation can save you years going down the wrong path, or it can accelerate where it is you're going to get to, because someone can tell you, oh yeah, like you need to do this, this, and this, you go do this, this, and this, and then you can make your transition a lot quicker. And so
Mhm.
I think when you're in the season of exploring and you really want to know, is this what I want to set my vision around? Have conversations. Like, it's the quickest way. So even if you're saying, I think my vision is that I want to step up into leadership, I want to be in the C-suite, like, go and speak to someone who's there and like really find out what are the realities of the day to day. Because I think oftentimes
Mhm.
people will focus on like the title of like, oh, I want to be this, I want to be that, but like, as I found out, when I thought, oh, I want to be a lawyer, the day-to-day of being a lawyer is a lot of reading, a lot of paper, a lot of drafting, a lot of late nights, a lot.
Right.
And like not a lot of what I thought it was, right? Which is like, oh, I get to speak to people and I get to really help people and really make an impact. It's like, yeah, there's that part, but also there's all of this.
Right.
So when you have conversations with people and you ask them questions like, can you just describe like what is a typical day for you? What are the things about your job that you really enjoy? What don't you enjoy? So you get a real picture of what it would look like to place yourself in that role. And then you may
Mm,
say, do you know what? This doesn't sound like it works for my lifestyle and what I want in this season. Or you might say, yeah, this sounds like I really want to explore this. So
yeah.
vital
Yeah.
to have conversations.
Love it. Love it. Not to do it in isolation. So, how do you deal with, the self doubt and the imposter syndrome, right? That kicks in. Because even probably thinking about, I mean, I love how you started with the parallel of how a CEO runs their business. You want to think about the same way in running your career. But, I know there's a lot of women, particularly those high achieving women who have reached pinnacles, who are just
Mhm.
already struggling with the belief that they deserve where they are to begin with, but even to
Yeah.
believe they can actually do something different. How do you help women really overcome and manage those things?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is causing them to take stock and reflect on what they've actually achieved. Because even people who, are in roles and they're like, oh my gosh, do I deserve to be here? Oftentimes, when I speak to women like that and I ask them about things that they've done, there is a lot of glossing over experience. So there's been times where I have conversations with people and they'll say things like, "Oh yeah, and I just did this thing." And it's major. And I have to say, hold on, wait, rewind. Say that again. You did what now? You managed what? Like, what was the budget on that project? You did. And they're like, oh yeah, actually, that was pretty. It's like because you're so used to just doing and getting the praise for doing well, you're not actually taking in what you did. And I think when I say taking what you did, it isn't just about, oh, yeah, we got that project over the line or we advised that client. Like, you need to really lean into what was the impact of what you were able to do and what was your contribution? Because sometimes people will say, oh, it was a group effort, it was a team effort. It's like,
Oh,
okay, yes,
yes.
okay, yes. But if you didn't do your part, what would have happened or what wouldn't have happened. And so I encourage people to really take the time to go back and look at their experience and like do an exercise where you're going through your career history and looking for milestones and markers where you've had incredible results, where you've received incredible feedback, where you've really moved the needle. And then what I tell people to do is write all that down and then I want you to read it as though you're reading it about someone else. So take your name off the paper and replace it with someone else
Mm,
and read it with that lens because I guarantee if you read it as though you're reading about someone else, you're going to give that person more credit than you would give yourself.
yeah, that is so true. I always tell my clients, I'm like, if $1 million deal went through and your role was to lick the stamps to drop the thing in the mail, you help land $1 million deal.
100%.
Like every piece of that is necessary, right? It's like with any kind of, for a car to run, the tire doesn't think it's less significant than the engine, right?
Mm,
Right. And if one of those goes out, you can't, I don't care if the engine is functioning, the
the
car will
car's
not
not
move.
going anywhere. Hmm.
Right. So every piece is necessary for that to, and every role that you played and a part of that is required and necessary. I love that. I love that.
Because
Yeah.
and if it wasn't, they wouldn't be paying you. Like why
Right.
why they hired you? Because your role is necessary, right? And so
Exactly.
if they hired you for the role, they're paying you to do the work and you're doing the work and you're doing it exceptionally well,
Mm-hmm.
is what I
Yeah,
say. Own it.
absolutely own it. Own it. Yes. And know your contribution that you're making. So we talked about, I love the two things around vision and strategy. Are there
Mhm.
some other like advice or kind of components of really taking the reins and stepping up as a CEO of your career that you would, advise or share to for women?
Yeah, so other pieces of it, so that would come under the strategy piece is you thinking about your visibility. So in order for you to make the vision a reality, the likelihood is, whether it's within your organization or externally, people need to know who you are and what you can bring to the table. So
Mhm.
it's that visibility piece. It's like, how are you actually marketing yourself and talking about your expertise and the skill set that you have and the value that you can bring? Like, those are things that, as in a company, like, you need to be visible and advertise. You need to have marketing, right?
Yep.
And then it's really looking at the operations piece is what I say. Like, if you think about a company that has a product that they deliver or a service that they deliver, you as an individual, whatever it is that you're doing in your career, like whatever your role is, that's your service. Like, you're serving your company, or you're serving the end user, which is the clients of the company, right? And so paying attention to that, like, are you committed to mastery around what it is that you do? Are you taking the
Mm.
time to recognize where there are gaps? Because sometimes it is true, if you're going to move from one role to another, or you're going to step up, you may not know everything. And so then
Mhm.
there's work that you can do to plug the gaps. So there may be knowledge gaps, but rather than say, oh, I don't know everything, I can't do it, it's identifying what are the knowledge gaps that I need to focus on, so that I feel more confident in what it is I bring to the table, and that I am fully equipped to do the role that I have. So it's about that balance between, I need to be doing the work and making sure that I'm improving on a skill set level, but then I also need to be visible, and I need to make sure that I'm telling people about the work that I'm able to do and achieve, so that they desire to
Mhm.
have me on their team, or they desire to hire me. And so there's that, like, that parallel that needs to be happening. It's the work, but you also need to be talking about the work, because the work doesn't speak for itself. And I think
Totally.
that is a thing where women often feel like, if I work hard, they'll notice. And it's like, no, you've got to do the hard work, but you also have to do the visibility piece. Like, you need to make sure that people know what it is that you're doing. Like, make it easy for them. They're not going to do the hard work to, like, oh, is this person? It's like, no, they expect you to do your work, but not everyone's
Mhm.
paying attention to the results that you're getting, right? As you go along. So you need to do that piece.
Yeah, it's kind of like that analogy, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, like, did it really
Uh-huh.
fall? And I always make that analogy. I'm like, you could have your head down working hard, but if nobody knows or pays attention, or you're not out there letting people know and having that visibility, as you said, then, not that it's for nothing, but it's not enough, right? It's
Hmm.
not enough of that. You need this other piece of the equation, the visibility, so that people can actually see the contribution that you're making and
Yeah.
understand that. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if that piece is missing, what ends up happening is resentment builds.
Mm,
People, oftentimes,
mhm.
the reason why people leave is because they feel undervalued, or they feel overlooked. And you can blame the organization to an extent, but I think there is a lot of responsibility on the individual to say, well, have I done my part to make sure that they see what it is that I'm doing? Because people get disgruntled. It's like, oh, so and so got promoted. I've been here for 5 years. They've been here for 5 minutes. It's like, yeah, but in that 5 minutes, they've been making a lot of noise. And so people notice them, whereas you've just
Yeah.
been in the corner for 5 years, just working hard. And that's the reality of the situation. And so you have to be strategic about what it is that you're doing and how you're showing up.
Yeah, and even the act of letting people know what you're doing and being visible and showing up is an aspect that leaders love to see. The organizations love to see the tenacity. They love to see
Hmm.
the fact that you're interested in what you're doing, that you like what you're doing, that you are making a contribution, that you know the contribution you're making because you're letting them know, here's how I'm helping the organization goes. And it's funny, I hear the same kind of conversations. Women are like, "Oh, I can't believe they passed me over for leadership." But I'm like, are you showing up as a
Hmm.
leader, right? And part of taking the reins and driving your career as a CEO is you showing up as a leader, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to being in the passenger seat and expecting someone to kind of drive you around.
Yeah. And the more you do it for yourself, and you start to think more strategically about where you're trying to get to, the more you're able to do it on behalf of the organization, because you start thinking
Yes.
differently and making decisions differently, where it's like, I'm not just making a decision in isolation. I'm always, like, in my mind, going back to the vision and saying, is this actually helping me get towards the vision? And as a leader in an organization, that's what you do. It's like, we've set the 3-year vision, the 5-year vision, and decisions that we're making as an organization, as a team, we're making sure that that aligns. So now, if you're an individual who is showing that you understand the company vision, and that the things that you're doing is in alignment with that, of course they're going to love you. Because they're going to be
Yes.
like, oh, she gets it. Like she understands what we're doing, and like not everyone is really paying attention to what's being said in those town hall meetings, but she gets it and she's connecting the dots. So it's really about exercising that muscle on an individual basis, and then you get to use that corporately within your
Hmm.
organization, and it benefits you and it benefits them.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so hard. I was talking to someone in another podcast episode, and he was just sharing that from his perspective, because we talked about like why is it so hard for women to speak up? Why is it so hard for them to showcase, their talents, their accomplishments, their achievements? And he made an interesting point that women have been throughout history penalized
Mm,
for showing up, right? And for talking, up or raising, their profile, so to speak, which I thought was a really kind of fascinating perspective. I think it's a true one as well. And so what are some of the ways that you help women? And I know for me, I work with a lot of women in midlife who kind of grew up in a time where girls were supposed to be seen and not heard. And that, I remember even my mother telling me at some point, who grew up, in the 40s and 50s, that if I stop being so smart because I may not find a husband.
mm.
Because for her, the pinnacle of success for me was to find a husband and have a family. And that was not the path that I wanted to be on. But I'm sure well-meaning parents were trying to help their daughters to be successful. And so I know a lot of women, like I said, in midlife, in my age bracket, heard those similar messages. So this idea of being visible and
Yeah,
showing off your achievements is really, a mindset shift and a struggle. How do you
yeah,
help women, really to see that being visible is actually a service and not necessarily an act of arrogance?
yeah. Um, the first thing I say is that if you are mindful or if you're worried about being arrogant, the likelihood is that you're not arrogant, because arrogant people don't worry about being arrogant, right? It's like
That's a
they just
great
are.
point.
They just are. So if you're concerned about it, like you're humble enough. But it's also thinking about the reason behind why you're doing what you're doing. So oftentimes when women are thinking about like climbing the ranks and growing in their careers, or shifting to do something else, there's an impact element. Like often people will say, I just want to know that the work that I'm doing is making a difference, or I just want to help people. And so their motivation for doing what it is that they want to do or getting to where they want to get to is that they want to do something good. Like they want to
Mhm.
make a difference to other people. And so if you lead with that, and then you say to yourself, I'm taking this action. It's not just all about me, and I'm not just trying to be big-headed and just big myself up, but I'm speaking up, I'm sharing, I'm doing these things because I know ultimately it's going to move me towards the vision, and that vision is going to allow me to make impact. So it comes back to the vision piece, because when you spend the time really like unpacking what you want the vision to be, there is that element of why in there. There is you asking
Mhm.
yourself like, okay, what do I want? Okay, why do I even want that? Like, let me understand that. And I do the 5 why exercise with a lot of my clients when they're first starting out, to get them to understand, like, why do I even desire to make this change right now? Why do I desire to
Mhm.
do this? And then when the going gets tough and you feel resistance, that's what you can come back to. Like, know
Mhm.
your why, come back to the why and say, okay, I know I feel a kind of way. I feel resistance around showing up, but I also know that if I don't show up, I'm not able to achieve this thing. And if I don't achieve this thing, I don't get to have whatever it is that they want from that, whether that be for
Mhm.
themselves or for other people. So I think it's about finding your why and fighting for it versus just being like, yeah, I can't, I'm just not going to.
Yeah, that's so good. I totally agree with that. Vision, understanding your why, having a strategy, visibility, and operations. I mean, it sounds like a sound strategy to be able to really take the reins and step into being the CEO of your career. I appreciate that. So, I have one more question
Yeah.
for you. So, for you, what does it mean to be a career rebel?
To be a career rebel. So my podcast is called the Career Changemaker Podcast, and my business is called Career Changemakers. And I feel like there's alignment between being a career change maker and also being a career rebel, because it really is about not accepting the status quo, in my opinion, and just like rather than just being like, I'm going to do what I'm expected to do, I'm going to do what's always been done. It's you putting a stake in the ground and saying, no, actually, I've thought about this, and this is what I desire to do. This is the impact I desire to make. This is the you know the legacy I want to leave through the work that I do. And so I might be doing something differently to what is expected of me, or differently to how people have done it in the past. But, I'm okay with that,
Mm,
because I want to be someone who's doing something different, and that I'm proud of how I've shown up in the world, and not go towards the end of your career and look back and regret that you didn't take action because of fear.
yeah. Love it. Love it. So fabulous. So Janine, where can people reach you and find you? And listen, we're going to have links in the show notes, but
Yeah.
what's the best way people can find you?
Yeah, the best way is to come over to LinkedIn. If you are committed to your career development in any way, you should be on LinkedIn. So connect with me over there. And yeah, like, I'd love to chat. If there was anything that you have questions on from what we discussed, feel free to reach out. But that's the best way, Janine Esbrand on LinkedIn. And if you want to check out the website, it's careerchangemakers.com, and the podcast is Career Changemaker Podcast.
Love it. Love it. And like I said, we'll have links in the show notes for everybody so you can find that. Janine, this has been such an enlightening and fabulously wonderful conversation. So thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Carol. It's been awesome. And yeah, I just hope everyone gets something from this conversation. So thank you.
Love it. Well, there you have it, Rebels. Another episode of the podcast. So much great insight here that I'm sure you will want to rewind and listen to again and again. Tips and tools to help you truly take the reins and step into the role of the CEO of your career. In this day and age, in the future of work, it's not just a nice thing to do, but it's actually a required thing to do. And that's why we wanted to have this conversation today. So listen to it again. Stay tuned for another amazing episode. And in the interim, have an amazingly rebellious week. And I'll see you soon. That's it for this week's episode. Hey, and if you're loving what you're learning, be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe to this podcast so you never miss another episode. Also, don't forget to read the show notes and grab the free resources mentioned so you can start implementing what you're learning right away. Finally, are you ready to unlock your potential and fearlessly go after the career and life you want? Then join me and a community of other high-achieving women in midlife, stepping into new levels of leadership, switching it up to do the meaningful and fulfilling work they're meant to do, and glowing up by creating the systems of freedom to achieve their dreams in Fearless, the Career Rebel Academy. You'll find the link in the show notes. Simply fill out the application, and together we'll determine if this is the right fit for you. I can't wait to see you there.